not based on your resume, not based on your intentions, based on the raw, unfiltered signal your body, your movement, and your presence broadcast the moment you cross the threshold. And right now, without training, without awareness, that signal is almost certainly working against you. Most men operate in public with a fundamental misunderstanding. They believe social environments are neutral, spaces where people gather, exchange pleasantries, conduct business, move on. They treat a restaurant, a meeting room, a social gathering, a street corner, as backdrop, as scenery, as nothing. Machiavelli understood something these men never will. There is no backdrop. There is only the arena. Every public space you enter is a live court, and in every court, without exception, a silent tribunal is already in session. People around you, colleagues, strangers, acquaintances, rivals, are continuously processing you, filing observations, assigning value, building a case file on who you are, what threat level you represent, and how much weight your presence deserves. They are not doing this maliciously. They are doing it automatically, because the human brain is a status sorting machine that has been running this exact program for 200,000 years. You don't get to opt out of the assessment. You only get to influence the verdict. The dangerous man, the one Machiavelli wrote for, the one history remembers, understood this intuitively. He never confused comfort with safety. He never mistook familiarity for trust. He walked into every room knowing that perception is infrastructure, that how you are seen is not vanity. It is architecture. It determines what doors open, which alliances form, who defers to you, and who quietly works to dismantle you. The unaware man confuses authenticity with strategy. He tells himself that being real is a virtue, that those who perform in public are somehow dishonest, while he, unguarded, unfiltered, leaking status cues like a broken pipe, is the genuine article. This is not integrity. This is naivety dressed in the language of character, and it costs him daily in ways he never fully traces back to the source. Here is the surgical truth. In public, you are never just present. You are always transmitting. Every pause before you speak, every glance you fail to hold, every laugh you give too easily, every space you shrink to accommodate someone else. These are not neutral behaviors. They are data, and the people around you are reading that data, whether they know it consciously or not. The prince who survived, in the Florentine court, in the Roman Senate, in the boardrooms that replaced them, was never the most talented man in the room. He was the man who understood that the room itself was the game board, that the real moves happened before the meeting, during the silence, in the posture, in the arrival, in the exit. This video is not about confidence. Confidence is a feeling. Feelings are unreliable. This is about code, a set of immutable behavioral laws that govern how power is assigned in public, laws that were operating long before Machiavelli named them, and that will continue operating long after you finish watching this. You have been inside arenas your entire life. You just didn't know the rules. That ends now. There is a process happening inside every person who has ever shared a room with you. It is not kind, it is not fair, and it has absolutely no interest in who you believe yourself to be. It is called social calibration, and it runs on autopilot. Neuroscience has confirmed what Machiavelli observed by candlelight in a Florentine study 500 years ago. The human brain dedicates enormous processing power to one relentless question: where does this person rank? Not consciously, not deliberately, but continuously, involuntarily, and with a precision that most people would find deeply uncomfortable if they understood its implications. Within seconds of encountering you, a person's brain has already begun constructing a social verdict: dominant or submissive, threat or non-factor, worthy of deference or worthy of dismissal. These assessments are built from micro-signals, the kind that operate far beneath the level of conversation. The speed of your movement, the stillness of your hands, whether your eye contact is offered or requested, whether you fill space or apologize for occupying it. And here is what makes this dangerous. The verdict calcifies. First impressions are not just powerful, they are structurally resistant to revision. The human brain, once it has filed a social assessment, does not remain open to renegotiation. It seeks confirmation. Every subsequent interaction you have with that person will be filtered through the lens of the initial verdict. If they scored you low in the first encounter, your future competence will be unconsciously discounted. Your future strength will be quietly dismissed. You will be working uphill, always, against a judgment that was made before you said a single word, and that most people will never consciously acknowledge holding. This is not pessimism. This is the operational reality of human social architecture. Machiavelli called it reputation. He treated it not as a byproduct of behavior, but as a strategic asset requiring active construction and ruthless protection. A prince who allowed his reputation to erode through careless public conduct was not a man with a minor image problem. He was a man bleeding power, inviting challenge, signaling to rivals that the throne was weaker than it appeared. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, a single evening of undisciplined behavior, too much wine, too much laughter, too much visible need for approval, could shift the political landscape by morning. The geography has changed. The mechanism has not. In the modern arena, offices, social gatherings, networks, negotiations, your public behavior is your political broadcast. Every room you enter, you are either consolidating your position or conceding ground. There is no static state. There is no neutral. You are either being filed under man of consequence or man of convenience. Consequence commands. Convenience gets used. The men who understand this do not move through public spaces the way you were taught to. They were never taught to be nice, to make everyone comfortable, to not take up too much space. Those instructions, absorbed from school, from family, from a culture that systemically pathologizes male authority, are not social graces. They are a leash, and the people who handed that leash to you were not your enemies, but the result is the same. You were trained to lose the scoring system you didn't know existed. Now consider the compounding damage. Every weak signal you have broadcast publicly, every unnecessary apology, every laugh offered to buy approval, every opinion swallowed to avoid friction, did not disappear into the air. It was absorbed, recorded, added to your running score. And that score determines who approaches you with opportunity and who approaches you with contempt, who asks for your opinion and who talks over you, who remembers your name and who forgets it before they reach the car park. This is not about arrogance. Arrogance is a compensation pattern. It is performed by men who are afraid the score is low and are trying to manually override the system through volume that is as transparent as it is ineffective. The tribunal sees through it instantly. What the tribunal responds to is something colder, quieter, more difficult to manufacture, and far more difficult to ignore. Controlled inevitability. The man who moves as though outcomes are already decided, who speaks at a pace that refuses urgency, who withholds reactions until reactions are strategically warranted, who is, at all times, more interested in the board than in being liked by the pieces. That man does not ask to be scored highly. He simply makes any other score illogical. These are not suggestions. They are not life hacks assembled from productivity blogs and repackaged with a Latin quote. What follows are 8 immutable behavioral laws, observable in every high-stakes social environment, documented across centuries of political and psychological study, and already being run instinctively by every man in any room who holds real power. You will recognize some of these, not because someone taught them to you, because you have watched them operate on you, in moments where someone outmaneuvered you socially, and you couldn't articulate why, in rooms where you felt invisible, despite speaking, in encounters where you left feeling subtracted from, rather than added to. That recognition is not coincidence. It is pattern literacy arriving late. Rule 1. Never explain yourself unprompted. The moment you volunteer justification for your actions, your decisions, or your presence, you have submitted to an invisible tribunal and entered a plea. Power does not explain itself. The sun does not justify its heat. When you over-explain in public, you are not being transparent. You are broadcasting insecurity, requesting permission to exist, and handing the audience a lever they did not have before you spoke. Say less. Hold the silence. Let the discomfort of unexplained confidence work for you. Rule 2. Never visibly react to disrespect. Reaction is surrender in real time. When someone diminishes you publicly, through a dismissive comment, an interruption, a deliberate slight, and you respond with visible emotion, you have confirmed their assessment. You have proven that their words have weight over your state. The strategic response to disrespect is not aggression, and it is not submission. It is stillness, a measured, unhurried, non-reaction that signals one thing clearly. You are beneath the threshold of what disturbs me. That signal is more devastating than any comeback. Rule 3. Control the pace of every interaction. Speed is submission. When you speak faster because someone important is in the room, when you rush to fill silence, when you accelerate your delivery to hold someone's attention, you are performing anxiety. High-status men do not adjust their tempo to accommodate the room. The room adjusts to them. Deliberately slow your speech in high-pressure interactions. Take the pause you are afraid to take. The man who controls pace controls the emotional temperature of every exchange, and emotional temperature is the invisible currency of dominance. Rule 4. Never compete for attention publicly. The man who fights for the floor has already lost it. Public attention-seeking, interrupting, escalating, performing, marks you immediately as someone who needs the room's validation to feel real. True social gravity does not chase, it pulls. The most powerful men in any gathering are frequently the quietest, not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand that scarcity creates value. Speak less. Make every entrance into a conversation surgical. When you do speak, the room will have already learned to stop and listen, because you have trained it to expect weight. Rule 5. Never reveal the full depth of your position. Machiavelli was explicit. A prince who shows all his cards invites attack on every front. In public, strategic ambiguity is armor. The man who announces his plans, broadcasts his ambitions, and narrates his progress in real time is not being open. He is being undefended. Other people do not need a complete picture of who you are, what you want, or where you are going. Partial revelation creates intrigue. Intrigue creates leverage. Give people enough to be curious, never enough to be certain. Rule 6. Guard your associations publicly. In social environments, you are the average of who you stand next to, and the audience is always calculating that average. Every person you give your time, your laughter, and your public proximity to is a character reference you did not intend to submit. This is not cruelty. It is cartography. The company you keep in public draws the map of who you are. High-value associations compound your perceived status. Low-value associations, particularly those performed eagerly and without discrimination, erode it. Be selective with public warmth. Reserve visible closeness for those whose proximity adds to the architecture you are building. Rule 7. Never make your ambition visible before it is secured. Visible hunger is a liability. The man who lets his ambition show before he holds the position is handing competitors a target and asking allies for reassurance he has not yet earned. In public, operate as though you have already arrived, not through arrogance, through settledness. The sovereign does not scramble, he presides. When you move through social environments with the calibrated ease of a man who is already where he is going, two things happen simultaneously. Rivals underestimate the threat, and the right doors begin to open with unusual ease. Operational code. The question is not whether these rules work. You already know they work. You have watched them operate on you from the other side. The question is whether you are finally ready to stop being the man they are used against. In 1513, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince from exile, stripped of his position, tortured by the state he had served, politically castrated, and left to rot on a small farm outside Florence. He did not write a lament. He did not write a self-help manual. He wrote a cold, precise autopsy of power, how it is won, how it is lost, and, most critically, how it is leaked, slowly, publicly, and almost always through behavioral failure rather than strategic miscalculation. 5 centuries later, the courts have changed their architecture. The mechanisms have not moved an inch. Machiavelli's central observation, the one that made the prince dangerous enough to be banned, burned, and blamed for the moral collapse of Western civilization, was deceptively simple. Perception is not a reflection of power. Perception is power. The prince, who was feared, respected, and strategically untouchable, was not necessarily the most capable man in the room. He was the man who most ruthlessly controlled what the room believed about him. This is not spin. This is not manipulation in the shallow, modern sense of the word. This is the foundational architecture of every durable power structure in recorded history. Consider Julius Caesar. At the peak of his political ascent, Caesar was renowned not merely for military genius, but for the calculated theatricality of his public conduct. He understood that Rome was an audience, and that audiences do not follow complexity, they follow symbol. His deliberate generosity in public, his choreographed humility before the Senate, his precise management of when to display strength and when to display restraint. These were not personality traits, they were instruments. The moment Caesar's public image fractured, the moment the audience began to read him as a king rather than a servant of the Republic, the knives came out, literally. The lesson Machiavelli extracted from Rome was not that Caesar was weak. It was that Caesar made a public behavioral error at the precise moment it was most dangerous to do so. He allowed the gap between what he was and what he appeared to be to collapse in full view of men who had been waiting for exactly that collapse. Now move forward. 18th century Versailles. Louis XIV, the Sun King, constructed the most sophisticated public dominance architecture in European history. Every element of Versailles was engineered to make the king's presence feel cosmically inevitable. The Hall of Mirrors, the ritualized morning ceremony where nobles competed for the honor of handing the king his shirt. The deliberate, glacial pace at which Louis moved through his own court. None of this was vanity. It was infrastructure. Louis understood that power, left unperformed, atrophies, that the moment a king begins to move through his court, like a private man, rushed, reactive, unguarded, the court begins unconsciously to stop treating him like a king. The modern boardroom operates on identical psychology. The executive who arrives late, speaks slowly, and withholds visible reaction to bad news is not being rude. He is running a 500-year-old dominance protocol that his competitors, the ones scrambling, over-explaining, and visibly hungry for approval, have never been taught to recognize. This is the thread that runs from the Florentine court to the corner office, from the Roman Forum to the social gathering you attended last week. The rules have never changed, only the costumes have. Machiavelli did not invent these laws. He was the first man ruthless enough to write them down without apology, to look at human social behavior without the comfort of moral framing, and describe with surgical precision what was actually happening beneath the performance of civilization. This is not a metaphor. When men hear the language of transformation, become a better version of yourself, evolve, grow, level up, they process it as addition, as accumulation, as the existing self preserved and intact, simply acquiring new attributes, like equipment slots being filled. Better habits, better posture, better strategy. Same man underneath, now upgraded. That is not what is being asked of you here. What is being asked is far more violent than that. And it is the reason most men who consume this content, who intellectually understand every principle, who feel the cold recognition of truth, who nod at the historical examples and save the video to a playlist, they will return to change. Nothing, not because the information failed them, because they were unwilling to do the one thing the information required. They were unwilling to let the losing version die. Understand what that version is. Not a villain, not a failure in the dramatic sense, just a man shaped by instructions he never consented to receive, from institutions that needed him compliant, from relationships that needed him manageable, from a culture that systematically pathologizes the precise qualities that would have made him dangerous to the wrong people and invaluable to the right ones. The version of you that over-explains was not born over-explaining. He was trained to justify himself to authorities who needed to feel in control of him. The version that shrinks in public was not born shrinking. He was conditioned to reduce his presence by environments that found his full presence inconvenient. The version that gives his approval away freely, that laughs too easily, that softens his edges to avoid the friction of being fully himself in public. That version was manufactured carefully over years by people and systems that had everything to gain from his smallness. That version served a purpose once. In childhood, these adaptations were survival mechanics. You were small, and the world was large, and accommodation was rational. But survival mechanics installed in childhood do not automatically decommission when the context that created them disappears. They calcify into identity, and then a man spends the rest of his life defending the cage as if it were his character. This is the architecture you are being asked to demolish. Identity death is not comfortable. It should not be. The self has powerful immune responses to existential threat, anxiety, resistance, sudden attachment to the familiar, a compelling internal argument that the old behaviors are actually fine, actually rational, actually not that bad. These responses will arrive. They are not signals to stop. They are confirmation that the demolition has reached the load-bearing walls. Push through them. The Stoics understood this process not as self-improvement, but as self-clarification, the systematic removal of everything false that had been layered over the essential nature of a man, until what remained was undeniable. Marcus Aurelius did not build himself into an emperor. He stripped away everything in him that was unworthy of the position, until the position fit naturally. The work was not construction, it was excavation. Machiavelli's prince did not reform his existing conduct. He abandoned it. He looked at the man he had been, the man shaped by sentiment, by inherited morality, by the comfortable illusion that virtue is its own protection. And he made a cold decision. That man cannot survive what is coming. That man does not belong in the arena I am entering. That man must be left behind. This is the binary the end of this video places in front of you. Not a gradient, not a spectrum, a binary. The man who walked into this video carried a behavioral identity built on conditions that no longer serve him. And in most cases, that actively work against him in every public environment he enters. That man explains himself unnecessarily, reacts visibly to disrespect, shrinks his physical presence, broadcasts his ambitions before they are secured, distributes his social warmth without discrimination, moves at the speed of anxiety rather than the pace of authority. That man has a file, a social verdict, already calcified in the minds of the people around him. A running score assembled from 1,000 unguarded public moments that determines exactly how much consequence the world assigns to his presence. You know this is true. You have felt it. In rooms where you spoke and were not heard, in conversations where you were talked over and said nothing, in social environments where you could feel, with a precision that defied articulation, that you were being managed rather than respected. You attributed it to circumstance, to personality, to the specific people involved. It was none of those things. It was the score. The replacement identity is not a performance. This is critical. The man you are building through the reprogramming protocol of Chapter 5 is not a mask over the existing architecture. He is the result of the existing architecture being systematically removed and replaced with something structurally different. New reflexes, new defaults, a new operating position in relation to public environments. Not as a man seeking to be correctly perceived, but as a man who has decided what he is and moves through the world as though that decision is final. That man does not need the room's agreement to feel real. That man does not calibrate his pace to the room's comfort. That man does not explain, apologize, shrink, or perform. He simply is, with a completeness and a settledness that the room has no choice but to accommodate. The people managing you are not necessarily malicious. In most cases, they are not even conscious of doing it. They are simply responding to the signal you broadcast, and the signal said, "This man can be managed." Until that signal changes, the management will continue. Question 3. What have you been explaining that required no explanation? Map the last week of your public behavior. Count the unjustified justifications, the unprompted defenses, the voluntary narrations of your decisions to audiences who had no authority over them. Add them up. That number is a direct measurement of how frequently you submitted to a tribunal that was not in session until you called it into session yourself. Every explanation you did not need to give was a unit of power transferred to the person receiving it. Over days, weeks, years, the cumulative transfer is enormous, and it has been running in one direction. Question 4. Where did you shrink? Not metaphorically, physically. In the last week, in the last month. Where did you make yourself smaller to accommodate the comfort of others? Where did you compress your posture, lower your voice, soften your eye contact, yield your physical space to someone who did not outrank you? Where did you smile preemptively, not from warmth, but from the anxious social calculus of a man who has learned that making himself less threatening is safer than occupying his full presence? Every one of those moments was a vote cast by your own body for the version of you that is losing. Now understand the brutal arithmetic of what you have just audited. These behaviors did not happen in isolation. They happened in front of people who will encounter you again tomorrow, next week, next year, people who have already constructed their verdict and are operating from it right now. In how they address you, in how much weight they assign your words, in whether they consider you when opportunities arise, or whether your name simply does not occur to them. The score is live. It is being updated continuously. And every day that passes without deliberate behavioral revision is another day of data added to a file that is already working against you. This is the warning Machiavelli issued, not in words, but in the entire architecture of the prince. The prince who does not actively manage his public conduct does not maintain a neutral position. He deteriorates. Because power is not a static possession, it is a perception. And perception, left unmanaged, defaults to erosion. The world does not hold your status in place while you figure out whether you want to claim it. It reassigns it continuously, without announcement, without apology.